Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, it is my review in the 1985 film Teen Wolf. Now, Teen Wolf is one of those movies that it's not great, but I have fun with it. Part of it is nostalgia because I grew up watching it and Teen Wolf 2 on VHS when I was a kid. And another part is just simply, it's one of those movies that is elevated enough by its star that it has some kind of magic. It's not consistent. It's not a film that I would say is a classic of the genre, of the teen comedy genre, or even of 80s cinema, but it does have a little spark to it that's all its own. And that is Michael J. Fox. Like Michael J. Fox, despite his misgivings when it comes to this movie, despite his thoughts in terms of it being an embarrassing project to work on, and he's ashamed of it, and he doesn't understand why there are fans of it, let alone fans who have this rabid cult obsession with it. Um, you can tell that despite the silliness, he really did give it his all here. He really did try. He had an inherent charisma and personality that was just electric. And even when he's under all the makeup and covered in all the fur, he's still just as charismatic and just as likable. And it's just one of those things where it's infectious. It's infectious when you see Michael J. Fox on screen just doing his thing and just being this charismatic, engaging, just great actor who just plays the everyman so well. And that really is the biggest selling point when it comes to this movie. It's Michael J. Fox. It's not the werewolf. It's not the supporting cast, although some of them are pretty decent. It's not the direction. It's not the script. It's Michael J. Fox. And so that's why, I can watch the movie. I can watch it for Michael J. Fox, for other aspects of the film, like the soundtrack, which I think is a lot of fun in its own right. But it's not something that I'm going to watch over and over again. It's not something that I would consider one of my personal favorites. It's directed by Rod Daniel, who prior to this did nothing but TV, including directing some episodes of WKRP in Cincinnati. And the sitcom sensibilities are definitely present here. In fact, the movie, because it's such a low budget film, at times it does honestly feel and play out like a TV movie. Like it honestly seems like something you would see on ABC or one of the networks around the time. I mean, Michael J. Fox even did a TV movie the same year called Poison Ivy, and it kind of has the same sort of look and feel to it. It doesn't. If you threw in a werewolf subplot into that movie, it would be hard to really tell the difference between the two. Um, and I think that's really due to the budget. It's just a very low budget movie, and it was shot in like 21 days. And Rod Daniel, for a first time director, like this is his first feature film, he did a fine job. He did an all right, decent, adequate a job behind the camera. It's not what I would consider to be a amazing work of direction, but it's good enough. I don't think he was the only guy who could have done it. Like some of the people say in the interviews on the 2.5 hour long documentary on the making of this movie that's on this Blu-ray. Yeah, for some reason, Teen Wolf has a 2.5 hour long documentary. Go figure. But yeah, I don't think he's irreplaceable. I think you could have picked a ton of other directors out of a hat around that time and they probably would have turned in a product that was just as adequate. But he still did a. I still think he did a good job for what the film is. It's a silly, ridiculous movie. It's a typical teen drama comedy with the twist being there's a high schooler who is a werewolf and plays basketball. Like that's the hook with this movie. And Rod at least knew that it was a comedy. He knew when to shoot scenes when it comes to the tone in a way that was more lighthearted, more comical, and he was honestly mostly consistent when it comes to that tone throughout the movie. But a lot of the shots in the film are just very standard, very stock, very typical. Not really a lot of movement of the camera, not really a lot of unique camera angles or different camera techniques that were utilized. Um, there were some moments where the direction was a little more dynamic, like during the transformation sequence, where there's a scene where the camera's looking down at Scott while he's in the bathroom, and there's a nice use of close ups and zooms in that scene. Uh, the sequence where Styles is surfing on top of the van at night, that was also a well shot scene, had a nice variety of different shots. Uh, Honestly, anything involving surfing on top of the van was shot really well. That scene, the scene where Scott, when he's wolfed out, doing the flips and doing the handstands on top of the wolf mobile while they're driving through town, that was also a well shot sequence. The basketball scenes, you can tell that it's a bunch of inexperienced people who don't know how to play basketball, who are just given choreography. And at times, the basketball scenes don't really have the best flow or the best feel to them. But there's enough energy when it comes to Rod's direction in those sequences that it still works. It's one of those things where yeah, it's not the best in terms of like the realism, but it's also a movie about a werewolf in high school playing basketball. So I don't really think the realism is anything that was necessary when it comes to this kind of stuff. Like, and also you have to cut some corners. You gotta make up for the low budget in some way, and and sometimes you do that by just having these sequences just be shot as quickly as possible, and it's just one of those things. But like I said, the energy level is high enough in those basketball scenes that I still think they're decent for what they are. And honestly, there's a nice bit of realism in the beginning of the movie that's honestly pretty surprising in terms of the way that the basketball scene is shot in the opening with the beavers and the dragons. Where the beavers are getting pummeled by the dragons, but there's this whole sequence that has a good use of slow mo and just a good use of music and everything and sound effects to just really create a very realistic sequence that really does showcase what it's like to be in a pressure situation, what it's like to be involved in a game or in something that's out of hand, or when you're the one that's trying to throw up a last minute shot or make the free throw. Like that was a really surprisingly realistic sequence. And there's other good scenes that have that same sort of realism throughout the film, like some of the stuff with just Scott hanging out with his friend Boof, or the scenes with Scott and Styles just hanging out and just, you know, being friends and being pals. The scenes with Scott and his dad when they're at home and his dad sharing advice, or the scene at the hardware store, or even like the party scene where Scott has that scene with Booth in the closet, and Styles is like the party coordinator, and you have the stuff with the Jello that's put into that girl's shirt, and Chubb is asked to eat the Jello. Like even like a scene like that had a certain realism to it that helped ground the film, and despite its silly absurdities of a teenage werewolf. But, you know, there's only so much you can do with the teenage werewolf concept. And after a certain point, even despite Rod's best efforts, it just becomes hard to look at because it's just so bad. It's so bad with the makeup and just the break dancing and the dancing and just even the montages with the werewolf playing basketball where it's clearly a stunt double. Like it's just one of those things where Rod's doing the best that he can with what he has to work with. And at this point, like he's working with the hair that's at the bottom of the shower drain. It's that kind of thing. So Rod did a good enough job, but I don't think it was spectacular, and I don't think he was like the only guy who could possibly direct this movie. Like, no, I don't buy that. The script by Jeff Loeb and Matthew Wiseman, I also think it's just kind of there. It's fine for what it is. It could have been a lot worse. Jeff Loeb, he's well known for his work in comics. He did writing for Marvel and DC. That's why there's a Uncle Ben callback in this film that is in a line of dialogue from Harold, Scott's dad, where he mentions to Scott about the with great power comes great responsibility, uh, and you can definitely get a sense of that comic sensibility or that comic vibe when it comes to the script. But it doesn't really play out like a Marvel or a DC comic. It plays out more like an Archie comic. More like it's something that would be a part of that universe. And there's something wholesome about that, and there's definitely some fun that can be milked out of that as well. But there's only so much you can do with such a silly concept of a teenager playing basketball as a werewolf. And there's just limits to that I don't care how talented of a writer you are, you can't get past that. And what I really like about this script is honestly not the Teen Wolf stuff, other than the fact that it does do something a little bit different in terms of playing around with conventions and having it be a different take on the werewolf genre. It's a more campy take on it. And on top of that, when Scott becomes a werewolf, he's, the most popular guy on on the on campus. Like he's the most popular guy in the halls of the school. Like he's the big man now. He's the big wolf. And he's not ostracized completely by the high school community, although there are some people who think he's a freak. And that's a different sort of dynamic. But that doesn't mean it's that unique or that original of a script. I mean, you watch the documentary and you listen to the writers and listen to other people talk about the script, and they're acting like it's such an original, inventive story and overall screenplay, and it's one of a kind, and it's lightning in a bottle. And I'm like, and it's not. It's pretty generic. It's got a lot of cliches. There's a lot of stuff that's fairly predictable about it. Yes, you have a good little twist there with changing things around in terms of, oh, he's different, But now, that doesn't mean that he's ostracized. It just means that now he's more loved and people like him more. And but other than that, you got a werewolf playing basketball, which is dumb. And I mean, I don't care who you are. It's really hard to get behind that concept. And you have some, you know, one-time gags that work, like the scene with Harold when Scott first wolfs out, and then Scott opens the door and then sees his dad is also a werewolf, and he's this cute, lovable looking werewolf who looks closer to Chewbacca than anything else. And there's stuff like that, but like other than that, and like the urban surfing stuff, and maybe like a few other lines of dialogue by some of the characters, like really the best parts of the script aren't really anything involving the wolf to me. Like the best parts of the script are like the first 30 minutes when you're building up to Scott becoming a werewolf, where you get little hints, little little touches here and there that show what's to come. So you see, like, oh, there's a scene where he has the pointy ears, oh, he's driving the van. Or there's the stuff where, he's got that weird long hair in the middle of his chest. And the sequence where he asks for the keg of beer from the crudmudgeon behind the counter. And gets the keg of beer because of his burgeoning werewolf abilities. Give me a keg, a beer, indeed. So like, like that's like the best parts of the movie to me. Or the party scene, the scene with Boof and Scott in the closet, and just how awkward and kind of uncomfortable that is, because Scott's just because he's been noticing all these changes, and so he's just questioning himself and having a lot of second guesses, and he's just not feeling comfortable. And Booth walks away after they have that awkward moment in the closet where things get a little too rough, and she walks away and the back of her dress has a giant claw mark in the back of it. That is where the film shines the most as a script to me. And the ending, when Scott decides to not be the wolf anymore in the final basketball sequence, which is the championship, which is a rematch against the Sea Dragons. And he plays without the wolf and learns how to be a team player, and they win as a team. And he gets the opportunity to shoot the game winner, and it goes in, and like that is where the script is at its best to me, is the stuff that doesn't even have to do with the werewolf. So it's like, honestly, I understand that the hook for the film and the selling point is the werewolf stuff, but I think you could have had a really good story and a really good movie just with these characters, with Scott and his dad and Styles and Boof and Chubb and the rival at the high school in Mick, and like the girl that Scott has a crush on who wants nothing to do with him, and Pamela, or the vice principal who's a thorn in their sides, and he's literally called Mr. Thorn, or the Coach Finstock, who's a complete loser who gives useless advice and is not an inspiration to any of his players. Like, I think you could just had a good teen comedy with some nice wholesome family or teen drama without the werewolf, and I think you would have had legitimately an even better movie, because then you wouldn't have to have like this silly wolf stuff hanging over the movie. Like, it almost would have been better as just another coming of age teen comedy drama without the werewolf angle. At least to me personally, because just the characters were so rich. Michael J. Fox was doing such a great job. But On the other hand, it wouldn't be as different, so it wouldn't stand out as much. So it's one of those things where, yeah, the best elements don't have to do with a werewolf, but the werewolf elements, although they are silly and kind of dumb at times, they still are effective enough that it kind of works. Like, it's one of those things. It's like it kind of works. I think the werewolf stuff would have been stronger if the script was better when it comes to showing the negative aspects of Scott being a werewolf. I think the screenwriters really dropped the ball with that. They tried to do this whole thing where he's selfish and, oh, he's not a team player when they're playing the basketball games, and he's ignoring Booth and ignoring some of his other friends and all of this other stuff. But that only works halfway, because when it comes to the dance scene where Mick confronts him, and it's supposed to be like a callback to the moment that Scott's dad was talking about where he made Mr. Thorne piss his pants, and it's the weakest, lamest fight imaginable. All he does is just lightly scratch the guy's shirt, and then he's embarrassed and feels bad because, oh, I did it out of anger and whatever. Like, at least hurt the guy. Like, at least show him get scratched in the chest, or like something happens that's more than just his clothes get torn up. Like, I don't really feel that that was handled very well. So, that makes the whole thing where he decides not to be the wolf anymore, uh, not have the same impact either, because it's like, okay, yeah, you're a little selfish and this and that, and you're honestly kind of using the wolf too much as a crutch, but at the same time, like, what are really the negatives when it comes to being the wolf? Uh, you're popular. You're not yourself. Well, I mean, yeah, okay, but there's still not, other than that, there's really not a lot of negatives. It seems like it just seems like being the wolf is cool, and you can get any girl you want. You can, dominate in basketball, and you can do sick dance moves and all of this other stuff. It's like, what really is the negative of being the wolf other than you're not yourself? Like, I don't think that that was written in the best way to really show uh, the negatives of Scott being the wolf. But it's just one of those movies that, because of the fact that the story is one of those stories that has its heart in the right place, it does ultimately have a certain charm to it. Even though it's predictable, I mean, come on, there are so many cliches and so many things in the script, like the jock who doesn't like the lead and bullies him every chance he's got. The finale where, oh, against all odds, they beat their rival, and they learn to play together, and Scott learns how to uh, be comfortable and being himself and winning in the end without the wolf, like, and he gets the girl that he really wanted this whole time, and Booth, like, it's the kind of thing that, yeah, you see a lot of the story beats coming, but at the same time it's also one of those movies where that's kind of what you expect, because it's all about this vibe, it's all about this feel, it's the fuzziness, it's about feeling that warm fuzziness that you get from stories and films like this. And as a comedy, I will also say this, it's not that funny. There's a few lines here and there, there's a few moments that'll make you chuckle and make you smirk a little bit, but it's not by any means an uproarious, hilarious comedy. Like, there are a fair amount of bits comedy wise that are honestly pretty lame. Like, I know Jay Tarses's character, Coach Finstock, he gets all this praise from fans and people talk and the writers who wrote this, like he's some great character. And I'm like, he's incredibly one note. Like he might as well be a cardboard cutout because all that he is just a parody of a cliched basketball coach. That's all he is. He's just a parody character where, oh, instead of him being inspirational, instead of him actually connecting with his players, he doesn't give a crap about his players. In fact, he's fine with forfeiting so he can, miss the 5 o'clock traffic. And he gives advice that is absolutely useless and doesn't make any sense. So, but that's all it is with that character. That's all that character is. There's nothing more to him. So if you don't find his shtick that funny, then the character just kind of becomes a little irritating and just feels out of place. You're like, okay, I get it. Coach who doesn't give a crap about his players, who gives bad advice. And is there anything more here? And it's kind of crazy because there's so many characters in this script that feel more well-rounded, like Scott, his father Howard, Booth, and even Styles, and in some ways Chubb. And then you got Coach Finstock, who's just this incredibly one-note character, or Mick, who's just your typical bully. But it's just one of those scripts that, yeah, it's not spectacular, it's not particularly special, but it still has a certain charm to it, like the overall film. And when it comes to other aspects of the movie, I mean, before I get to the cast, because that's really the only other thing that really stands out about it, other than the soundtrack, the cinematography by Tim Sherstead, it's it's good. It's fine for this kind of movie, for a low budget film with a silly concept. Does a good job providing a nice look and feel to the movie that's rather consistent, making it feel like it's a slice of small town American shenanigans. The editing by Lois Freeman Fox in her first ever editing job. You can tell that it's her first ever editing job because there's some scenes that are just edited in ways that are they're a bit janky. I got to be honest. Like there are basketball scenes that things don't fit together properly. When you have like scenes where they're dribbling the ball and they're going up the court and somebody shoots the ball, but then it just cuts to the hoop and then the ball going in. And it's just that when that kind of stuff happens, it just feels like, okay, I don't buy that guy made that shot because you're not even able to show him actually making the shot. And there's a lot of stuff like that in the basketball scenes that are just not really edited the best. But the cast, I mean, that's really what kind of makes or breaks this movie, if you think about it. It's not necessarily the direction, it's not even necessarily the script, it's the cast. I mean, I do agree from a lot of people who worked on the movie, the casting director, when he's talking about the film on the documentary, I do agree that this cast was really good. I think this was a great cast for a not so great movie, to be honest. Michael J. Fox is Scott Howard. I know he felt ashamed and embarrassed because Spielberg is shooting serious films and real movies down the street, and here I am shooting a film about a teenage werewolf. And I get it. I get his perspective, but Michael was such a legitimately great guy that never really came across when it comes to him interacting with his co-stars or on the screen. I think he did a great job. I think it's a good performance. I think it's the best performance that you could possibly get out of a silly, dumb concept like this. He still was very game for this. It wasn't one of those things where he half-assed anything. He still gave it his all, and you just couldn't help but just really enjoy watching him work, watching him play Scott, who's down on himself, and he doesn't have a lot of self confidence, but there's still a certain charisma to him because of the fact that it's played by Michael J. Fox. That you root for him and you want him to win in the end. Then when he becomes the werewolf, you see him break out of his shell, and it works because Michael J. Fox is just so good at playing these kind of characters who are at first kind of shy, and just not really confident in their abilities or who they are. But then when there's something happens, they're able to come out and just effortlessly be the cool guy, but in a way that's not obnoxious, which is honestly difficult to do, especially when you're wearing a werewolf costume. Like, it's easy to just be obnoxious and just be annoying, and he wasn't. That wasn't the case. Um, yeah, I know Michael J. Fox doesn't like this movie, doesn't like talking about this movie, despite the fact that it was a film that was made as a vehicle solely for him. In fact, it was only made because one of the co-stars of Family Ties, I think it was Meredith Baxter Burney. She was pregnant, and there was this whole thing where, oh well, you can shoot the movie when she's having the babies, but after that, you don't have Michael J. Fox anymore. So yeah, Michael J. Fox, great as Scott Howard. James Hampton, I also thought did a really good job as his dad, Harold. Just had some really good chemistry with Michael. Like, you really bought that they were father and son. Speaking of chemistry, I thought Susan Ursitti as Boof. I thought she had some nice chemistry with Michael. Good romantic chemistry, good chemistry when it comes to the two just being friends. And it was nice to see, you know, a guy get the girl and he's not friend zoned. That was a nice change of pace because it seemed like one of those things where, oh, they're just, it's just one of those things where you're stuck in the friend zone, and that didn't happen because the two seemed like they really did have a good connection with one another. Jerry Levine as Styles, I loved his performance in this. Just a really fun character, just a ball of energy, a ball of fun, the kind of guy you would love to party with. And Matt Adler was fine as like the more reserved friend of the group. Lorie Griffin was like the sex appeal. She was the one that Scott had the hots for, and you definitely understood why. Jim McCrell was Mr. Thorne. Good, just asshole principal who you didn't like. Speaking of assholes, Mark Arnold was a great asshole and just a total douchebag as Mick, the jock. Jay Tarses is Coach Finstock, and I mean, did okay with a character that's just so one note. Mark Holton, I enjoyed his chubby, just had his own just sense of humor and just charisma that was just uniquely him. Like, he's this big guy, and he's overweight, but he plays into it, and he's fine with incorporating that into his character, and he did it in a way that was it was charming. Like, he had this certain charm to him despite the fact that a lot of the jokes were at his expense, but it just seemed like one of those things where he owned it. He was like, yeah, I'm fat, but you know what? Like, I'm not going to let that prevent me from being happy and partying and eating jello out of some girl's top and making a basketball shot. Like, it's just, it was nice to see an overweight character that was just confident. Like, he was confident, like, despite his size. But yeah, really good cast, and the soundtrack I love this soundtrack. I mean, Flesh on Fire by James House, Win in the End by Mark Safon, Silhouette by David Palmer, even some of the goofier songs like Way to Go by Mark Viha or Good News by David Morgan, or Big Bad Wolf by the Wolf Sisters, or the sappy love ballad Shooting for the Moon by Amy Holland. And the score is fine too by Miles Goodman, especially the music that plays during the transformation scene. But yeah, that's Teen Wolf. I really don't know what else to say about the movie except if you're a fan of the film, I would definitely recommend picking up this Blu-ray sometime. I mean, you got the 2.5 hour long documentary, and you got a new 2K scan of the film. So if you're a Teen Wolf fanatic, like that's definitely something you should pick up if you haven't already. Um, and it's a film that, yeah, I don't think it's as bad as some people make it out to be. Definitely as bad as some of the critics said it was when it came out. Like I don't think it's that bad. If you want a really bad film involving a Teen Wolf, Teen Wolf 2, like that film sucks. But Teen Wolf, it's a time waster for me. Like it's a watchable movie. It has some goofy charm to it, but definitely not what I would consider to be a classic of the werewolf genre or even of the teen comedy genre. But it's definitely worth a watch for Michael J. Fox at the very least. But anyway, thanks for watching my review of Teen Wolf, and until next time, I'll see you later.